appreciate so much the invitation that has been extended to me to come and to be with you this week. And Amy and I are just really enjoying ourselves. We appreciate so much the hospitality that has been shown to us this week. It has been a pleasure to be with you, to eat with some of you, to enjoy the time that we can spend together on a personal level and also in these times together in worship to God. It hit me today, I'm not sure, but I think David may be the northernmost preacher in the United States, and this may be the northernmost congregation in the United States. And so I'll have something to brag about when I get home, that if I'm not mistaken, I don't think there's anything north of the Nordic Circle in the United States anyway. So that'll be bragging rights for me. Then I'll be able to tell people you haven't preached further north than I have, at least in the United States. We are talking this week about victorious faith based on 1 John 5 and verse 4. It tells us that the victory that overcomes the world is our faith. As we practice our faith in Jesus Christ and in God, we are rewarded with victory. Jesus is victorious. He is victorious over sin. He's victorious over this world. And so we can share that victory with Him. And so we've been looking at either individuals or churches that experienced that victory of faith. And tonight, we are going to look at David and Goliath. One of the favorite stories, I guess, of every little boy that grows up in a Bible class, hearing the story of David and Goliath, and how this what would seem to be a weak and insignificant young man defeats this mighty warrior. It begins in the first verse of 1 Samuel chapter 17. We're told that the Philistines, who at this time were basically the mortal enemies of the children of Israel, they come up to do what they frequently did with Israel, to do battle with them. They make an incursion into Israelite territory. And as you go down and you see the Israelites go out to meet them, you have the Philistines on one mountain, you have Israel on the other mountain, and there's a valley between them. And the intention of the Philistines is to do battle. Now, in that day and time, there were two ways that you could do battle. The first was that you could just all get out your swords and spears and slingshots and all those kind of things and just have at it, and the last people standing would be victorious. Now, there was a more civilized way that was often chosen. Instead of both of the armies, the entire armies coming out and doing battle, one side would choose its champion, the other side would choose its champion, and the two champions would come out and do battle with one another with the agreement that the army whose champion lost would lay down their arms and surrender to the army that had won. That was the more civilized way of doing things. Now, that's the way the Philistines wanted to do things. And they didn't want to do that because they were just a civilized people who didn't want the Israelites to lose their lives. They did it because they believed that they had the absolute champion. They believed that they had the warrior who no one could beat. And so you have this champion, Goliath by name, and we're told that every day, twice a day, for 40 days, he came out and he challenged the army of Israel. Choose you a champion and let him come out and fight me. 40 days of that, this man comes out and shouts across this valley to the army of Israel. Now, the army of Israel was the army of God, and they had seen great victories from God in the battles that they had been through. But evidently, they had never had this kind of a challenge of a 9 foot 9 inch tall giant with 157 pounds of armor. No Israelite had ever had that kind of a challenge. And so even though they were the army of the living God, yet they shrinked back at this challenge. Goliath would come out and he would issue the challenge, and Israel's army, the whole army, shrunk back in fear. Well, this happens for 40 days. And then young David comes onto the scene. We were introduced to David earlier on, but this is really Israel's introduction to the young shepherd boy. His brothers are in the army. There are some of those who shrunk back and will not agree to go out and meet Goliath. And so they need provisions, and so David's father sends him to the army with provisions for his brothers. And it just so happens that right after he gets there, Goliath does his daily challenge. He comes out and he issues this challenge. And David says, I'll go out and meet him. And so we know the story. David goes out, and he goes out only armed with a staff and with his sling. He chooses some stones from the creek bed. He goes out, and he gains that great victory. He slings that stone. He lets loose of that sling. The stone comes up, hits the giant in the forehead. The giant falls down. David picks up the giant's sword, takes it over, cuts the giant's head off. At this sight, the Philistines run. They kind of break their agreement. They run. Israel pursues them, and Israel has this great victory. Now, that's an impressive story. But it's only as worthwhile to us as the lessons that we learn. And there are several lessons about giant problems that we face that seek to challenge our faith as the children of God. That's what we're going to talk about tonight. What are the 4 lessons, really, that we can learn about those giants that we face? We don't face 9 foot 9 inch tall giants. I've seen some tall guys, but I've not seen one anywhere near that. I've stood fairly close to some NBA basketball stars that have been over 7 feet. You take them, as giant as they are, this guy is at least 2 feet taller than any of them. We've never seen anything like that. Nothing like that has ever challenged us. But there are those giant things, giant problems that we face, and that's what Goliath is to the army of Israel. He is one giant problem that they must overcome. Well, don't we have giant problems to overcome in our lives? Whether it's health issues or financial issues, or issues in our marriages or our friendships or with brethren, whatever those challenges are, we face those challenges. And I'll tell you, the devil makes sure that we face those challenges. The devil doesn't want us to have the faith that God wants us to place in Him. And so the devil places those challenges in front of us in the hopes that our faith will not be strong enough to face those giant challenges that we face. And so let's talk about 4 things that we can learn from this story of David and Goliath. And the first is that you don't have to be Goliath in order to beat Goliath. Biblical history is replete with examples of the seemingly inferior, as the world counts inferior, being victorious over the seemingly greater. We see story after story of victory against overwhelming odds. And it seems like as you read all of these stories of God's people being challenged by the world, God's people are always in the minority. That's how God's people fought most of the challenges that came to their life, and that's the way that victory was won, always with overwhelming odds. And you see that in a number of people. As Israel comes into the promised land after their years of wandering in the wilderness, because of a lack of faith, they finally are able to cross over the Jordan River into the promised land. And the first challenge that they have is one of the mighty cities of the land of Canaan, the city of Jericho with its mighty walls. Children of Israel are ill-equipped to face that kind of an enemy. They are ill-equipped to take that kind of a city, that kind of a force, and they would have never been able to, except that God was with them, and God was the one who would give them the victory. I have no doubt but that it was God's choice of Jericho for a purpose, to be the first city that they would conquer, and that was to show these people beyond a shadow of a doubt that God could give them a victory over any enemy that would come up against them. But we see at the very beginning of Israel's entrance into the promised land, there was this victory against overwhelming odds. And then as we get into the Judges, in Judges chapter 7, we have the story of Gideon. And Gideon is one of the judges, and he is going to go to battle. And he's going to battle the forces of Midian, who are 135,000 strong. That's a big army, especially in that day and age, to have to fight that kind of an enemy. Well, Gideon has an army of 32,000. And that's pretty bad odds, isn't it? 1 in 4.5 or so odds of gaining victory there. And yet God says that's too many. The odds aren't overwhelming enough. And so God says, Gideon, tell the army that whoever's afraid, go home. And so Gideon tells the army that, and 22,000 go home. So now it's 10,000 versus 135,000. And you think, man, that's overwhelming odds. But it's not overwhelming enough for God to make his point. And so he has the army go down to the river, and whoever picks water up and laps it is on one side, and on the other side are the folks who actually bend down, get on their knees, and drink. 9,700 get down on their knees and drink in the water. Only 300 lap their water. And God says, you take that 300. 300 versus 135,000. And God's point now is, now the odds are overwhelming enough that when that 300 gain the victory, there will be no doubt but who gave them that victory. And then you have further on in the book of Judges, Samson and the 1,000 Philistines. And he defeats those 1,000 Philistines with the jawbone of a donkey. Kills them all. Now tell me when that would ever have been done without the help of God. The point again is that you don't have to be the one who has the odds in your favor, as far as the world would consider that, in order to gain victory with God. Then you have Elijah and the 450 prophets of Baal over in 1 Kings, and on and on and on we could go. But the point is made that this is the way God has chosen for his people to always gain victory. It is against those overwhelming odds when the world would think there is no way that you could ever gain victory. Yet in faith in God, God on your side gains the victory. And what that tells us is the biggest and the best equipped don't always win. In 1 Samuel chapter 17, 1 Samuel chapter 17 and verse 45, as David comes out to meet this warrior Goliath, and they have this conversation with one another. Goliath is indignant that this kind of a wimpy little fellow would come out to meet him in battle. And what the Philistine basically says to him is, I'm going to so thoroughly whip you that nothing will be left except you will be bird feed and feed for the beast. David's answer to that is, we'll see. We'll see who gains the victory. We'll see who makes who the bird feed. We'll see who prepares who, tenderizes who to be the food of beasts. In verse 45, David says, you come to me with a sword, with a spear, and with a javelin. But I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hand, and I will strike you and take your head from you. And this day I will give the carcasses of the camp of the Philistines to the birds of the air and the wild beasts of the earth. And all the earth will know that there is a God in Israel. Isn't that a wonderful statement there? What a wonderful statement of faith that is. That all of God's people will know, and all of the Philistines will know, because of the defeat that is coming under such overwhelming odds. Everyone will know that it is God. In verse 47, then all this assembly shall know that the Lord, and listen to this, the Lord does not save with sword and spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hands. And so David wants Goliath to know that it's not about who has the greatest experience, who is the bigger guy, who is the more proficient warrior, who's fought the most battles, who has all of the best equipment. That's not what it's about. What it's about is who is God fighting for, who is on the Lord's side in this battle. And so the psalmist says in Psalm chapter 20 and verse 7, some trust in chariots and some in horses, but we will remember the name of the Lord our God. And so the message for us is, oftentimes I think we get this idea that, man, in order to fight these great spiritual battles, we have to be great spiritual warriors. We have to be giants of the faith in order to defeat those problems that come into our life. But the fact of the matter is, we don't have to be a giant to beat giant problems. We don't have to be Goliath in order to beat Goliath. The second point I would share with you is that trials build faith in God. That's a lesson that we learn here in 1 Samuel chapter 17. Here is David, and while the rest of the army of Israel, they've all shrunk back, even their king Saul has shrunk back. He refuses to go out. He is the mightiest warrior of all of the army of Israel. Head and shoulders taller and bigger than the rest of these people. Even he shrinks back in fear. And yet here comes the young shepherd boy David, and he says, I'll go out and do battle with this giant. And Saul calls David to him, basically with the intention of trying to figure out why it is that David has this courage to face this giant. And here's David's answer, beginning at verse 34 of 1 Samuel chapter 17. But David said to Saul, your servant used to keep his father's sheep. And when a lion or a bear came and took a lamb out of the flock, I went out after it and struck it and delivered the lamb from its mouth. And when it arose against me, I caught it by its beard and struck and killed it. Your servant has killed both lion and bear, and this uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, seeing he has defied the armies of the living God. Moreover, David said, the Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear, he will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine. And Saul said to David, go, and the Lord be with you. What is it that caused David to have the kind of confidence that he had, that he could actually go out and fight this giant, and God could give him victory? That's what Saul wanted to know. And David's answer is, because I have fought battles before. I have had challenges before. And God has always delivered me. He was a shepherd. And he said, as a shepherd, when a lion would come and try to take my sheep, I fought the lion and I defeated the lion. When a bear came and it would try to take my sheep, I would fight that bear. And God gave me victory over the lion. He gave me victory over the bear. And if that was the case, then God can give me victory over this giant. And so the source of David's faith was the trials that he had gone through. David rejoiced in his previous trials. They prepared him for the trial that he faced now. And so David goes out and he goes to battle. He stops and he picks up 5 smooth stones. By the way, have you ever wondered why it was 5 smooth stones and not 1? You think David thought, well, 1 might not cut it. Maybe I'll need 5 stones in case the first 4 stones miss. I'll tell you why I think it was. It's 1 Samuel 21 and 1 Chronicles chapter 20. We're told that Goliath had 4 sons who were giants too. And it could very well be that David thought, if I kill this giant, I'll have to face his 4 sons then. I would like to think at least that that's the reason he picked up 5 stones. He was ready to meet the challenge that would come to him. If that's not the case, Goliath at least still had an armor bearer, and no doubt a number of people who were with him preparing for that battle. What's your attitude toward the trials that come to your life? We're told in James chapter 1, verses 2 and 3, that we're to rejoice in the trials. James writes, my brethren, count it all joy when you fall into various trials, knowing that the testing of your faith produces patience. And so James says what we need to do, how we need to face the trials of life, is not to moan and groan about it, not to wonder why God has chosen me for these trials, but he says you rejoice in those trials. You count it joy to go through those trials. Peter says basically the same thing in 1 Peter chapter 1, verses 5 through 7, that we rejoice. We meet those trials with joy. Now, I don't think either James or Peter is saying that when we go through some kind of a trial, be it a health trial or financial trial or whatever it may be that we go through, I don't think he's saying there that we ought to just kind of, be happy about it and, throw a party and say, isn't it great, I'm getting to go through a trial. I don't think that's the point that either one of these New Testament writers are making. I think what they're saying is, realize, rather than bemoaning the trial and wondering, why me? Why do I have to go through this? Realize the benefit of the trial. And you can have joy through the trials when you realize that God is benefiting you, that you're getting something that makes you better. in the trials that you go through. James says they produce patience. Isn't that the case with David? David could patiently go out and do battle with Goliath because he had done trials and been victorious through them on other occasions. And so James says, don't bemoan the trial. See the benefit of the trial. See the patience that you develop. And isn't that what we see in our own lives? We go through a trial, and that prepares us for the next trial. And the more trials that we go, I tell you, I've seen people go through trials, and I wonder how in the world they ever got through those trials. How in the world did they even begin to face those trials? And it would hit me, 2 years ago they had another trial. And the year before that, they had another trial. Maybe not as great as this trial, but what was happening as they went through trial after trial, it was building up their faith. So that eventually, when they came against that great trial, that 9 foot 9 inch tall, 157 pounds of armor type trial, they were ready for it because they had built up that patience that caused their faith to be strong when they faced that trial. Peter says it proves our faith to be genuine. You ever wondered what it would, what you would be able to go through and keep your faith in God? There are a lot of people that go through tremendous trials. And I'll tell you what they know when they come through those trials with faith in God. I'll tell you what they're assured of, and that is that their faith is genuine. Their trust in God is genuine. That faith for them is more than just something that they say. It is something that they have. And someone like me who maybe has not gone through those trials, I have no idea. I have no idea how I would react in those kinds of situations because I've not been through them. And that's what Peter's talking about in 1 Peter chapter 1. It'll prove the genuineness of your faith. Just like gold is proven to be genuine as it goes through the furnace and all the bad things are burnt off of it, and what is left when it goes through the furnace is pure gold. He says that's what happens with your faith, and you know that your faith is genuine. And so James says, rejoice in the trials. Peter says, rejoice in the trials. Paul in Romans 5, verses 3 through 4 says, glory in the tribulations. Same idea. How often do we look at the smaller problems as opportunities to have strength for greater problems? I want you to notice Paul's attitude. Go over to 2 Corinthians chapter 12. In 2 Corinthians chapter 12, the Apostle Paul describes what he calls a thorn in the flesh that was given to him by Satan in order to buffet him. A lot of questions about what exactly this thorn in the flesh was. There was something about his life that was painful to him, that he prayed to God 3 times that God would take away from him. For what it's worth to you, I think it was his eyesight. And that's just Jerry's opinion. But we find in other places evidence that Paul's eyesight was not what Paul wanted it to be. May not have been it, but that would certainly be a trial, wouldn't it? That you could understand why a man like Paul would pray to God earnestly over and over again that God would deliver him from. And here's what God said to him. It says, and he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my strength is made perfect in weakness. My grace is sufficient for you. That is, I have given you enough. Basically what his answer was, that's the lengthy way of God saying to Paul, no. Paul says, take this trial away from me. Take this problem, this giant problem, away from me. And God says no. I don't know, if I was Paul, that might have really irritated me. Here I have done all of these things for the cause of Jesus Christ. I've done all of these wonderful things. I have gone out into the world. I've given up this position of popularity and wealth among the Israelite people in order to suffer for the cause of the gospel of Jesus Christ. Gone and established all of these congregations, being the greatest force, the spread of the gospel of Jesus Christ, and all I ever asked for was one thing. And God says no. I'm not sure I would have taken that very well. How would you have taken that? Here's how Paul took it. God says no, and in the middle of verse 9, Paul says, therefore most gladly I will rather boast in my infirmities, that the power of Christ may rest upon me. Therefore I take pleasure in infirmities, in reproaches, in needs, in persecutions, in distresses, for Christ's sake. For when I am weak, then I am strong. And so Paul says, if God says no, I'm going to accept no, and I'm going to rejoice in the ability to endure that trial, because I know that as I endure that trial, I will be strong and stronger in my faith. What a wonderful attitude Paul had, an attitude that all of us certainly need to have. Trials build faith in God. We should accept those trials, and we should rejoice in the opportunity for those trials to give us what we need to fully trust in Jesus Christ. Third point of this battle between David and Goliath is that Goliaths are usually about as big as we imagine them to be. Our approach to a problem pretty much depends on how we look at that problem. What did Israel see? When they looked across the mountain, what they saw was a 9-foot, 9-inch, fully decked out in 157 pounds of armor, fully equipped with a spear that was like a weaver's beam, a huge thing, with a sword, with a shield. They saw this experienced giant of a warrior, and they shrunk back in fear. You know what David saw when he looked across at who it was that was shouting at God's army? The last part of verse 26 in 1 Samuel 17, who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God? What David saw was this Gentile he's not even one of the people of God, and he's talking like this. How dare this guy say the things that he is saying? And so David is indignant while the rest of Israel is shaking in their boots. And the amazing thing is they were all looking at the exact same thing. What David saw was exactly what they were seeing. And at the same time, it wasn't. You see, one saw the power of the world in relation to man. The other saw the weakness of the world in relation to God. Israel looks out and they measure this man, and he is 9 foot 9 inches tall, and they say, we're not anywhere near that. This man's twice as big as we are. They saw his weapons. His weapons were twice as powerful as ours. They judged him according to their own view of themselves. And what they saw was themselves getting slaughtered by this guy. Didn't stand a chance. David looks out, and he sees just a human being that is a measly 9 foot 9 inches tall. What is that in comparison to God? Isaiah 40 and verse 12 says, our God holds the oceans in the palm of his hand. What is a 9 foot 9 inch man in relation to us? He's a big guy. What is a 9 foot 9 inch man in relation to our God who holds the oceans in the palm of his hand? He's nothing. He's a speck. He's insignificant. Our problems are as big only as we allow ourselves to see them to be. And so what do you see? What do you see when you look at the world? Do you see the power of the world in relation to you, or the weakness of the world in relation to God? Paul in 2 Corinthians chapter 4, turn over there. I think that's a very significant verse to consider. The Apostle Paul in 2 Corinthians chapter 4 and verse 17 talks about our light affliction. For our light affliction, which is but for a moment, is working for us a far more exceeding and eternal weight of glory, while we do not look at the things which are seen, but at the things which are not seen. For the things which are seen are temporary, but the things which are not seen are eternal. And so he says we're going through this momentary light affliction. You know what Paul's momentary light affliction was? He describes it in the 11th chapter of 2 Corinthians. He says, are they ministers of Christ? I speak as a fool. I am more. In labors more abundant, in stripes above measure, in prisons more frequently, in deaths often. From the Jews 5 times I received 40 stripes minus 1. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was stoned. 3 times I was shipwrecked. A night and a day I have been in the deep, in perils often, in perils of waters, in perils of robbers, in perils of my own countrymen, in perils of the Gentiles, in perils in the city, in perils in the wilderness, in perils in the sea, in perils among false brethren, in weariness and toil, and sleeplessness often, in hunger and thirst, in fastings often, in cold and nakedness. I'll tell you, the AC is not working in my office, and I think I am suffering more than any preacher in the brotherhood. Man, it's horrible, and I'm wondering why have I ever committed myself to doing this preaching job if I have to do it with no air conditioning. If you live in Dallas, you know how miserable that can be. Here, not bad. They're pretty bad. And then I look at Paul and all that he went through, and I wonder how dare he mention these things and then in chapter 4 call what he is going through a light affliction. How can Paul consider what he is going through to be a light affliction? It's not light to me, and what Paul says is, it's all according to how you look at it. And he says, I'm not looking at it through physical eyes. I'm not looking at this situation as a physical situation. What I am looking at is this situation through spiritual eyes. Doesn't seem very light to me, and Paul says it's according to how you look at it. If you look at it and compare what you are going through in life, whether it's something as insignificant as the air conditioning in your office has gone out and you're going to have to sweat a little bit while you study for your next lesson, or it's something as major as what Paul describes in 2 Corinthians chapter 11, whatever it is. Paul says that I know that the affliction that I go through can't even begin to measure up, to equal what I get when I get to heaven. The path and the difficulties of the path, he says, are not even to be compared. There's no comparison, he says, to the glory of heaven that is ours for eternity. Light affliction, according to how you look at it. Paul's confidence in Philippians chapter 4 and verse 13 is that he could do all things. How could he get through these things that he's talking about in 2 Corinthians 11, the shipwrecks, the stonings? You know, he was stoned, if not to death, then certainly almost to death one time. He was beaten on a number of occasions, he says. He had suffered shipwreck, all of these kinds of things. How could he go through that? In Philippians 4 and verse 13, he tells the Philippian church how he could go through it. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. That is his confidence. And that's what caused him to look at those trials that he went through that looked so very giant. That's how he could look at them and see them as basically insignificant. And that's not to say that the trial that you may go through is just nothing. We're not trying to say that. What we're saying is, look at that trial. When you think that trial is unbearable, look at that trial and compare it to the glory that will be yours when you are spending eternity in heaven. Fourth lesson, fourth and final. Slaying Goliaths always bring great reward. David asked the question when here's Goliath out there on that hill, and he's shouting across, and David's listening to it. And David has a question for Israel, and that is, what do you get if you go over there and you whip that guy? And they told him, well, here's what you get. You get a lot of riches. You get the hand of the king's daughter in marriage. And you get other special privileges. He would never have to pay taxes again for the rest of his life. That's my dream. He said, that's what's going to be yours if you'll go out there and you'll fight this guy. I wonder what Saul was thinking when he said, whoever goes out there and beats this fella, I'll give him my daughter in marriage, if he thought he would be going home that day with a daughter who was still single. Because nobody was going to beat this fella. If Saul thought that Goliath was able to be beaten, I have no doubt but he'd have gone out there and done it himself. He saw Goliath, like the rest of them did, as an undefeatable giant, an undefeatable problem. But he offers this reward as incentive. And that's significant. But I'll tell you, the greatest reward that David got is found in 1 Samuel chapter 18 and verse 14. And that is, the Lord was with him. The Lord was pleased at the great faith that David showed in going out and doing what David needed to do in faith. In faith that God would be with him. In faith that God would give him the victory. And because of David's great faith, God was with him. And that meant all the difference in the world in David's life. And it may be all the difference in the world in our lives as well. We noted last night, we'll note again, Revelation 2, verses 10 and 11, be faithful unto death, and I will give you the crown of life. He who overcomes will not be hurt by the second death. The first death is physical death. The second death is eternal death. Separation from God for eternity. And he said the prospect of that won't harm the people of God who are faithful to him until death. And so I ask you tonight, are you determined? Are you determined to be faithful to God until you come to the end of this life? That's what God is looking for. God's looking for faith. Faith that's willing to stand up against any giant that crosses your path in this life. Faith intact in God, obedience, committed to that obedience to him, no matter what is the cost that you have to pay. That's what God is looking for in you. Will you have that faith? Can we help you tonight to begin to have that faith? Can we help you tonight to obey the gospel of Jesus Christ that will result in the forgiveness of your sins and the hope of eternal life? If we can, let us know how we can by coming forward right now while together we stand and sing.